The moment death comes, it is not dramatic. There is no final speech, no slow collapse, no heroic last stand. Just a sharp interruption. 1 second, Arturo exists. The next, everything is gone. And then, there is something else. Not darkness. Not light. Just awareness. A space that doesn't feel like a place. For a brief, disorienting stretch, there is nothing to hold on to. No body, no ground, no breath. Just the quiet realization that whatever life was, it has already ended. And then a voice arrives. Not loud, not echoing, just present, calm, observing, offering a second chance. No explanations about heaven, no judgment, no punishment. Just a choice. Continue or disappear into whatever comes next. For most people, that decision would take time. For Arturo, it doesn't. Because there is nothing behind him worth returning to. No unfinished dream strong enough to fight for. No attachment powerful enough to anchor him. Just a life that ended, and the simple, immediate instinct to keep going. So, he accepts. And that is when the real decision appears. Not just life, but where, worlds, possibilities. Stories he once knew as fiction, now laid out like options. And among them, one stands out instantly. Naruto. A world of power, conflict, growth. A world where strength can be earned, where knowledge can become advantage. Where someone who knows the story could survive. Or maybe even thrive. He chooses it without hesitation. And that is when everything begins to move again. Not as a transition, but as a drop. A fall into something tighter, smaller. A body. A newborn body. The first sensation is suffocating. Weight, pressure. Sound flooding in without meaning. Light too bright to understand. Movement that does not respond the way it should. And then the realization hits. Not slowly, not gently, but all at once. He is not observing this life. He is inside it. A cry escapes him before he can stop it. Sharp and instinctive, pulled out of lungs that are far too small to hold the thoughts racing through his mind. Voices surround him. Blurred, distant, but real. Hands lift him. Warm, careful. And in that moment, before language fully settles, before memory organizes itself into something usable, one truth lands with absolute clarity. This is real, not a dream, not a simulation, not a second layer of consciousness. A real world, a real body, a real beginning. Time passes, but it does not feel like time. It feels like compression, moments stacking, senses sharpening, control returning piece by piece. At first, everything is instinct, hunger, sleep, noise, movement. But slowly, thought stabilizes. And with it, memory. He remembers who he was, he remembers what he chose, and more importantly, he remembers the world he entered, Naruto. Not just a story, but a structure, events, wars, characters, deaths, a timeline. And that is when the second realization arrives. He does not know where he is in it. Not yet. Days turn into something more coherent. Shapes become faces. Voices become patterns. And one of those patterns begins to repeat. A man. Older. Presence heavy without being oppressive. A kind of authority that does not need to prove itself. When the man enters the room, others adjust. Subtly, automatically, respect, power. And when the man looks at him, there is something else there. Recognition. Not of who he was, but of what he is. A son. That word takes longer to settle. Not because it is unfamiliar, but because of who it belongs to. The pieces align slowly. Fragments of memory connecting to observation. The clothing, the environment, the behavior of the people around him. The name, when it finally comes, is not spoken directly to him, but near him. And that is enough. Sarutobi. The realization does not explode, it sinks in, heavy, certain, and then the final piece falls into place. Asuma. For a moment, everything stops again. Not physically. The world continues. The room breathes. Voices move. But inside, thought freezes. Because this is not a random placement. This is not a background character. This is someone with a future. A defined one. A death. And suddenly, the second life he chose begins to feel structured, limited. He knows what happens to Asuma Sarutobi. He knows how it ends. And more importantly, he knows how little control Asuma originally had over that outcome. That should be terrifying, but it isn't. Not completely. Because alongside that realization comes another. He is not the same Asuma, not the one who lived that life, not the one who followed that path. This version has something the original never did. Awareness. And awareness changes everything. At first, there is nothing he can do. His body does not respond with precision. His muscles are weak. His coordination non-existent. But his mind is already moving, observing patterns, tracking routines, measuring reactions, waiting. Because if there is one thing he understands immediately, It is this: time, right now, is his greatest advantage. No one expects anything from him. No one is watching for potential. No one is measuring growth, which means he is invisible. And in a world like this, invisibility is power. The first breakthrough comes quietly. So quietly that no one notices it. A flicker, not visible, not dramatic, internal. A sensation he recognizes instantly, not from experience, but from knowledge. Chakra. At first, it is faint, almost imaginary. But it is there, and once he finds it, he does not let it go. Again and again and again. Each attempt is clumsy, inconsistent, barely controlled. But that does not matter, because the goal is not mastery, not yet. The goal is familiarity. Understanding the flow, the pressure, the shape of it, and, more importantly, proving that he can access it at all. Because if he can do that now, then everything else changes. Days become practice. Practice becomes routine. Routine becomes progress. Tiny, almost invisible improvements stacking on top of each other. Control sharpens, not fast, but steadily, enough that he begins to notice something unexpected. This body responds well, better than it should. Where most children would struggle to even sense chakra consistently, he is already stabilizing it. Where instinct should dominate, control is beginning to take over, and that raises a question, not about effort, but about potential. Because if this is what he can do now, what happens when his body catches up to his mind? That thought should be exciting. Instead, it is dangerous. Because potential in this world does not stay hidden forever, eventually someone notices. Eventually someone asks questions. And in Konoha, the wrong attention can change everything, so he adjusts, not his training, but his visibility. Progress continues, but outwardly, he remains exactly what everyone expects. A normal child, quiet, observant, unremarkable. At least, that is what they see. But inside, something else is forming. A structure, not just of power, but of direction, because knowing the future is not enough. Not if the future itself is already shifting. Small differences begin to appear, subtle, easy to dismiss, but real. Behavior that doesn't match memory. Timing that feels slightly off. Details that should align but don't. At first, he assumes it is error, memory distortion, misinterpretation. But as it happens again and again, that assumption starts to break. Because this is not deviation, this is divergence. And if the timeline is already changing, then the advantage he thought he had is no longer guaranteed. That realization lands harder than death ever did. Because it means one thing: this is not a story he can follow. This is a world he has to survive. And survival here is not about knowing what happens next. It is about being strong enough when what happens next is no longer predictable. For a moment, it seems like a setback, like the ground has shifted beneath him. But then, another thought replaces it, sharper, colder. If the timeline is changing, then so can outcomes. Not just the bad ones, all of them. And suddenly, the second life he chose becomes something else entirely. Not a path to follow, but a system to control. The question is no longer whether he can survive this world. The question is, how much of it he can reshape before it pushes back. And that answer begins to form far earlier than anyone expects. Because the first real test is already approaching. A moment that should be simple, a gathering, a celebration, a birthday. But in this version of events, it will not be simple at all. Because this is the day other people begin to notice. The day invisibility starts to crack. The day his second life stops being hidden and starts becoming a problem for everyone watching. And once that happens, there is no going back. The birthday arrives wrapped in the kind of warmth that should feel harmless. Lantern light, quiet laughter, footsteps crossing polished wood. The low murmur of adults speaking in the next room, as though the world beyond these walls does not run on bloodlines, secrets, and the constant arithmetic of power. For any ordinary child, it would simply be a memory in the making. For Asuma, it feels like an ambush, not because of danger in the immediate sense. No blade waits behind a screen, no assassin slips through the shadows. But because gatherings in a place like this are never just gatherings. Not when the Sarutobi name is attached. Not when important people come to observe, even if they pretend they are only there to celebrate. And from the moment the first guests arrive, he understands exactly what kind of day this is going to be. Some come with gifts, some come with smiles, some come to measure. That last group matters most. Even as a child, he can feel it in the way certain adults look at him. Not warmly, not even coldly, but analytically, as though they are examining something that has not yet decided what it will become. Their eyes move too slowly. Their pauses last too long. Every small reaction becomes information. He keeps his own face calm. That is the first rule now. If this is the day people begin to notice, then what they notice has to be controlled. The house is fuller than he expected. Familiar clan colors pass through the rooms. Voices carry names he recognizes from another life, but the strange thing is not their presence, it is the timing. A few people are here who should not matter yet. A few connections feel too early, too convenient. Like pieces from separate chapters placed on the same board. That unsettles him more than he wants to admit, because it confirms what he has already begun to suspect. This world is not waiting for canon to unfold in neat order. It is moving according to its own pressure, its own logic, and that means any advantage he has exists only if he can adapt faster than everyone else. He is turning that thought over when another presence enters the room and shifts the balance without a single word. Not because of noise, because of weight. Sakamo Hatake carries himself like someone who has already become legend and has not yet decided whether that is a blessing or a burden. There is no theatricality in him, no need for display. But when he walks in, conversations bend around him anyway. And beside him is a child with silver hair and eyes that already seem too sharp for his age. Kakashi. The recognition is instant. So is the realization that the problem is standing closer than expected. Kakashi, even now, does not move like a normal child. There is a quiet alertness to him, the kind that makes stillness look like readiness. He watches the room the way adults watch a battlefield before the first move. It would be unsettling in anyone else. In him, it feels inevitable. For a moment, their eyes meet. There is no dramatic spark. No music in the air. No cosmic sense of rivalry. Just assessment. Fast. Mutual. Complete. Kakashi looks at him as though filing something away. Asuma does the same. And there it is. The first true crack in the day's illusion of normalcy. Because this is not a harmless encounter between children, it is a measurement. One prodigy, whether the world has named him that yet or not, recognizing the possibility of another. The adults keep talking. Tea is poured. Politeness continues. But a second game has already begun. At first, it hides behind harmless things. A contest of balance. A subtle test of reaction time. The kind of small challenge adults dismiss as children being competitive while secretly learning everything from the result. Asuma has a choice. Play the role expected of him, remain safely ordinary, and let the moment pass. Or reveal just enough to shape the impression being formed around him. He chooses the narrow path between the two. Not too much. Never too much. But enough. A thrown object changes hands faster than most children could track. A movement across the floor comes cleaner than it should. A small demonstration of control lands with just enough precision to make one or two conversations in the room go quiet for half a second before resuming. That half second matters more than applause ever could. He feels it immediately. Sakumo notices. Not obviously, not with surprise, but with the kind of still attention that means a conclusion has been reached and stored for later. Hiruzen notices too, though that is more dangerous in a different way. A father can take pride in talent. A leader has to think about what talent attracts. And then there's another gaze, one that arrives almost late enough to miss if not for the cold edge beneath it. Danzo. He is not the center of the room. He does not need to be. Men like him understand the value of the perimeter. Influence works best when it does not beg for attention. Asuma sees him only briefly, standing at a conversational angle with the kind of posture that suggests passivity while concealing constant calculation. One visible eye, one unreadable expression, a presence like a closed door. And the moment that eye settles on him, the warmth of the house drops away. This is the first true danger. Not because Danzo acts, he does not. He simply observes, and in doing so turns a child's birthday into the opening move of something far older and far uglier than rivalry. Asuma lowers his gaze before the look can become mutual for too long. Not submissive. Just young enough, ordinary enough. He cannot afford to look like he understands what that man is. But understanding it changes the entire shape of the day. Because now the rules are clear. Talent will bring recognition. Recognition will bring expectations. And expectations, in Konoha, always attract predators. The rest of the gathering moves around him like a river he can no longer fully trust. Gifts are offered. Names are exchanged. Laughter returns. Yet beneath all of it, the pressure remains. He has stepped into visibility, and visibility cannot be undone. Later, the children are allowed more space to move on their own. That, too, is a test disguised as kindness. Adults learn a great deal by pretending not to watch. Kakashi ends up near him without seeming to approach. It is the sort of positioning only someone already trained to control space would manage naturally. For a few seconds, neither speaks. Then Kakashi says, "You're strange." It is such a flat, unadorned statement that Asuma almost laughs. Almost. Instead, he studies the silver-haired boy with equal care. You notice that fast. Kakashi's expression barely changes, but something in his eyes sharpens. So you know it too. The line hangs there between them, more revealing than either of them should allow. This is dangerous in a new way, not because of adults now, but because Kakashi is exactly the kind of person who will not let unanswered questions go. In another life, he becomes famous for carrying burdens in silence. But silence is not the same thing as ignorance. A child like this notices patterns. Once he sees one, he keeps pulling at the thread until something gives. Asuma answers carefully, "I know I don't like losing." That earns the faintest reaction, not a smile. Kakashi does not seem built for easy smiles, but there is a subtle shift, as though a piece on the board has finally declared its movement. "Good," Kakashi says. "That would be boring." It is the closest thing to friendship the moment can support, and also the beginning of something sharper. Because from there, every small exchange becomes challenge, a test of speed, a test of memory, a test of balance along a garden edge that neither of them should cross so cleanly at their age. Nothing decisive, nothing loud, but enough to leave an impression on anyone who happens to glance their way and understand what they are seeing. Two children, too precise, too focused, already moving like a promise of future trouble. The strange part is that Asuma enjoys it, not because it is safe, it is not. Not because winning matters yet, it does, but not in the childish way. He enjoys it because for the first time since arriving in this world, someone is meeting him at the level of intent rather than expectation. Kakashi is not treating him like a small boy. He is treating him like a problem worth solving. That is rare, that is useful, and that is exactly why it cannot remain simple. By the time the day begins to wind down, a shape has formed around him. Not public acclaim, nothing that dramatic, but the subtler kind of reputation that matters more in hidden villages. The sense that the third Hokage's son may not be merely well-born, that there may be something unusual there, something worth remembering. Sakumo says little before leaving, but when he rests a hand briefly on Kakashi's shoulder and looks toward Asuma, there is approval in it. Not spoken, recorded. Danzo says nothing at all. That is worse. Because silence from men like him is never absence. It is consideration. When the guests are finally gone and the house grows quiet again, Asuma sits with the echo of the day pressing against his thoughts. The celebration is over. The danger, he realizes, has only just begun. Hiruzen finds him there after some time, not in the posture of the Hokage, but as a father returning to a quiet room after a long performance. He sits nearby and studies him with the kind of softness powerful men rarely allow themselves. "You were impressive today," he says. Simple words, warm words, but Asuma hears the weight beneath them, impressive enough to be noticed. Impressive enough to start changing how people see him. He lowers his eyes, playing at thoughtfulness, letting a child's silence fill the space while his mind races ahead. What does Hiruzen know already? What has he inferred? More importantly, what will he do with it? "I only wanted to do well," Asuma says at last. It is the correct answer. Honest enough to sound natural, harmless enough to reveal nothing. Hiruzen hums softly, as though hearing more in the line than the words alone. That can be a good thing. It can also become a burden. There it is. Not a warning, not fully, but close. Asuma looks up, and for a brief moment he sees not the kindly old man of memory, not the distant symbol of leadership, but a shinobi who has spent a lifetime understanding how early talent can become both a weapon and a curse. "I'll be careful," Asuma says. That makes Hiruzen smile, but not because he believes the promise. More because he recognizes the instinct behind it. After that, the conversation drifts to quieter things, the kind a child would remember fondly. But Asuma leaves it with one conclusion fixed in place. He can no longer pretend the timeline will wait for him to prepare. The world has begun reacting. That changes everything. In the days that follow, his training evolves from curiosity into discipline. No more unfocused experimentation. No more simply sensing chakra because he can. Every exercise now serves a purpose. Breath control, balance, fine movement. The internal shaping of chakra through repetition so boring and exacting that most children would never endure it without complaint. He endures it because he understands compound advantage. Tiny improvements become instincts. Instincts become foundations. Foundations become separation. And separation, in a world of shinobi, becomes survival. His body is still young, but it is no longer helpless. He learns the limits of muscle and tendon with care, pushing just hard enough to force growth without drawing concern. When adults are watching, he is lively, intelligent, occasionally difficult in the harmless way children are expected to be. When alone, or as alone as the son of Asuma Sarutobi can ever be, he becomes methodical. He begins adapting motions from memory, not exact techniques from another world but principles. Weight transfer, efficient lines, economy of movement. The body may be that of a child, but the mind guiding it already understands that power wasted in motion is power lost in combat. It is during one of these private sessions that he first starts thinking seriously about blades. Not because he can wield one yet. The idea would be ridiculous in any practical sense. His arms are too short, his frame too light. But the concept settled into him anyway. A shape of future intent. Asuma, in the original timeline, had his chakra blades. Distinctive, effective, brutal in close range. But what if he began much earlier with the idea of edge, reach, and killing space? What if instead of inheriting a style by accident of adulthood, he built one deliberately from childhood upward? That thought takes root and refuses to leave. Not a technique yet. A direction. He adds wooden implements to his routine when possible, simple enough to pass as play. Sticks become placeholders for weapons he cannot use yet. Footwork drills become games to anyone glancing in from afar. But inside the pattern, a future is being assembled, and each day makes one thing clearer. He is improving too fast. Not outwardly enough to panic anyone. Not yet. But internally, the difference is impossible to ignore. Chakra obeys more readily. His body integrates repetition with alarming efficiency. His reactions sharpen beyond what should be natural for his age. There are only two possibilities. Either this body was always meant for frightening potential, or his soul's prior maturity is creating an advantage no one in this world knows how to measure. Either way, the outcome is the same. He will become dangerous. The question is whether he can choose the timing. That question becomes harder to answer when Kakashi begins appearing more often, not constantly, not obviously, but enough to make one thing clear. The rivalry born at the birthday was not left there. Sometimes it is chance, or something that looks like chance. Shared lessons. Overlapping schedules. Adults bringing their children into the same orbit under respectable pretexts. Sometimes it is not chance at all. Kakashi watches him the way predators watch movement in tall grass, calmly, patiently, as though he does not need answers immediately because sooner or later the truth of a person reveals itself in what they cannot help doing. Asuma, in turn, begins studying Kakashi with equal intensity. The silver-haired child is every bit as abnormal as memory promised. Fast, observant, disciplined to a degree that borders on inhuman. But there is something else there too, something not yet fully formed. Loneliness, not weakness, never that. More like distance. A layer of separation already hardening between Kakashi and everyone around him, even adults who love him. That matters. Because loneliness can become arrogance. It can become detachment. But under the right conditions, it can also become loyalty of the most dangerous kind. Asuma does not know yet which way this version of Kakashi will grow. He only knows that the answer will matter to him far earlier than expected. And beyond that rivalry, beyond training, beyond the invisible pressure beginning to shape his childhood into strategy, another realization settles in with slow, undeniable force. He is not simply preparing for survival anymore. He is building toward intervention, not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Danzo is already watching, the timeline is already drifting. And if he waits too long, the world will harden around decisions other people make. That cannot happen. Somewhere ahead are war councils, betrayals, laboratories, clan politics, buried resentments, and all the machinery that turns villages into engines of sacrifice. He knows enough of this world to understand that by the time most people notice those machines, they are already caught inside them. So the true beginning is not some future battlefield. It is here, in hidden routines. In children measuring one another under adult eyes. In one birthday party that should have meant nothing and instead announced his existence to the wrong people. That is where the alternate timeline truly opens, not with a grand declaration, with attention. And attention, once earned, has a way of dragging destiny closer. The first sign comes in the form of routine, not broken routine, tightened routine. A child does not always notice when adults begin adjusting the shape of his day around him. Lessons become a little more deliberate. Supervision grows subtly more consistent. Opportunities appear with just enough regularity to feel natural if one is not looking for design. Asuma is looking for it. He notices the way certain instructors linger a fraction longer when he practices basic control. He notices that small tests begin finding him without being announced as tests. A balance exercise here, a memory drill there, harmless on the surface, but too cleanly timed to be coincidence. Even the conversations around him have changed. Adults no longer speak only as though he is present, but too young to matter. Now and then, a sentence cuts off when he enters a room. That is enough to confirm what he already feared. The birthday did not merely create curiosity, it started evaluation. For a while, he tries to stay ahead of it by narrowing his visible growth. He makes mistakes on purpose, not obvious ones, nothing insulting. Just enough unevenness to keep himself from looking impossible. He lets a movement come a little slower in public than it does in private. He asks a question he already knows the answer to. He plays the role of the promising child rather than the dangerous one. It works, mostly, But the problem with talent is that once people have seen the outline of it, they start noticing even what you conceal. That becomes painfully clear the day Hiruzen brings him to a training ground under the gentle fiction of father and son spending time together. No escorts, no ceremony, no formal announcement, which makes it more dangerous, not less. The third Hokage does not need an audience to test someone. The air is cool, the earth slightly damp from earlier rain, the trees holding on to the scent of water and bark. It would almost be peaceful if not for the fact that Asuma knows the purpose of this outing before they even arrive. Hiruzen walks with his usual calm, hands loose, posture relaxed, the image of a man entirely at ease in his own village. But that ease is precisely what makes him terrifying. Men like this do not waste motion. They do not waste curiosity either. When they stop in an open space, he turns with a soft smile. Show me. 2 words. No specifics. No excuse to hide behind. Asuma studies him for a second longer than a normal child should. The request is simple enough to sound casual. It is not casual. Hiruzen is doing what great shinobi do best, forcing the other person to reveal how they think by leaving the terms just open enough to matter. Show me what? Control? Speed? Initiative? Obedience? The answer, of course, is all of it. So Asuma gives him a version of the truth. Not everything, never that. He starts with chakra control because it is the least alarming kind of skill for a child to display. A leaf. A steady hand. Focus channeled into something quiet and exact. He lets the exercise run long enough to show competence, not long enough to show mastery. Hiruzen watches without interruption. Then he asks for movement. Asuma obeys. Footwork across the clearing, short bursts of acceleration, changes in direction. Nothing superhuman. Nothing that screams anomaly. But the body remembers what it has practiced in secret, and even restrained precision has a way of looking sharper than expected. Again, Hiruzen says nothing. That silence presses harder than praise would. At last, the old man kneels so they are closer to eye level, and what Asuma sees there is not suspicion. It is concern. You're pushing yourself, Hiruzen says. There is no accusation in it. That almost makes it worse. Asuma lowers his gaze, buying a moment to shape the answer. I want to be strong. A child's answer. A true answer. Hiruzen's eyes remain on him, warm but searching. Why? And there it is. The real test. Not skill, motive. Because strength in Konoha is never just strength. Strength belongs to a story. It must be aimed at something. Pride, fear, duty, love, ambition, revenge. The reason matters almost as much as the outcome. Asuma could lie. He could say he wants to make his father proud. He could say he wants to protect the village. Both answers would be acceptable. Both would also be incomplete in a way Hiruzen might feel. So he chooses a more dangerous truth, softened into something a child can carry. Because I don't want to be helpless when bad things happen. The words land between them, and for the first time, the expression on Hiruzen's face shifts fully away from curiosity. This answer he understands too well. For a long moment, the leaves overhead move louder than either of them. Then Hiruzen reaches out and rests a hand on Asuma's shoulder. That is not a foolish reason, he says quietly. But strength sought from fear can become a cage. Asuma looks up. There is no lecture in the old man's tone, only memory. He wonders, not for the first time, how much Hiruzen sees when he looks at people he loves. Not titles, not potential. The things beneath them. The fractures that form before anyone else notices. I'll be careful, Asuma says again. This time, Hiruzen almost laughs. Not because it is funny, because it is the kind of answer a child gives when he already knows caution will not stop him. That day changes something between them. Not dramatically. Hiruzen does not confront him. He does not shut down the training. If anything, he becomes more attentive in a way that feels dangerously compassionate. As though he has accepted that this son of his will not be ordinary and is now thinking harder about what that means. That should be reassuring. Instead, it sharpens the edge of everything else. Because if Hiruzen is beginning to understand him, others will try, and some of them will not care whether understanding him hurts. The next sign comes through the village itself. Konoha has rhythms, patrols, schedules, social currents, invisible hierarchies layered beneath the visible ones. Asuma is too young to move freely through most of it, but children in powerful families are often underestimated in one useful respect. They are present for more than adults realize. Hallways, waiting rooms, gardens near meeting places, the edges of conversations. That is where he begins hearing a name with uncomfortable regularity. The Fire Daimyo, not in isolation, in context with the Sarutobi name, with policy, with appointments. With the subtle, maddening kind of political gravity that reminds him his father is not merely a father, He is a man balanced between village power and national power, between military necessity and ceremonial obligation. And where those powers overlap, ambition always breeds. It dawns on Asuma slowly that his life is not just entangled with future battles, it is entangled with institutions, expectations older than he is, alliances negotiated in rooms he may never even enter. The son of the Hokage is not allowed to become merely himself. He is interpreted, used, positioned. That realization settles like a stone in his chest. Because it means every step towards strength risks becoming someone else's property. He is turning that over one afternoon when he runs into Kakashi again. If running into Kakashi is even the right phrase for someone who appears with such unnerving precision that it is hard to believe chance has anything to do with it. They end up near the edge of a smaller training area, half shaded and empty except for the faint marks of older practice. Kakashi is holding a wooden blade. Of course he is. Even at this age, he seems built around discipline the way other children are built around play. Asuma's eyes flick to the weapon. Kakashi notices, "You've been thinking about swords." It is not phrased as a question. For a second, Asuma says nothing. Then, because denial would be pointless, he replies, "And you've been watching too closely." Kakashi's expression remains maddeningly level. "You move like you're planning for reach." That answer lands harder than it should, not because it reveals too much, because it proves something important. Kakashi is not only observing him, he is analyzing patterns beneath the obvious ones. Most adults notice results. Kakashi notices intention. Dangerous, Asuma thinks again. Useful, another part of him answers. He picks up a spare wooden stick and turns it once in his hand. "Maybe I just like the shape." Kakashi studies him. "No. You like what it changes." There it is. The clean cutting instinct that will one day make him lethal. Asuma exhales through his nose. "And what do you think it changes?" Kakashi steps forward, light on his feet in a way that makes the answer visible before he speaks. Distance, timing, fear. Then he attacks, not viciously, not recklessly, but with startling efficiency for a child. Asuma reacts on instinct, the wooden stick lifting in a late, sharp line that catches the angle just enough to divert rather than block cleanly. The impact travels through his smaller frame and tells him immediately what the eye already knew. Kakashi is ahead in practical combat, better trained, more polished, more used to turning movement into force, but not unreachable. They separate, circle, clash again. The exchange is fast and quiet, stripped of all unnecessary noise. Wood strikes wood. Feet shift over packed earth. Tiny corrections turn near errors into narrow recoveries. It is not a duel in any formal sense. It is two children testing futures they can already feel waiting for them. Kakashi is cleaner. Asuma is more adaptive. One has structure, the other has hunger. For a few breathless seconds, that difference becomes the entire conversation. Then Kakashi feints high and sweeps low enough to break Asuma's base. Asuma twists out of the worst of it, but not fast enough to keep from stumbling back a step. In a real fight, that step would cost blood. The point is made. Kakashi lowers his weapon first. "You saw the trap," he says, "as I was falling into it. That's still better than not seeing it." It is, absurdly, the nicest thing Kakashi has said to him. Asuma straightens and brushes dirt from his sleeve, more irritated by the lesson than the loss. Not because losing matters in itself, because the shape of the loss tells him where the gap is. Kakashi has repetition, he does not. Practical drilled precision, technical sharpness laid down over time. That can be closed, but only with work. "What do you want?" Asuma asks. Kakashi blinks once. "What do you mean? You keep finding me." Kakashi looks away for a moment, just enough to reveal that the answer is not as simple as talent recognizing talent. Then he says, "You don't act like everyone else." "Neither do you," Asuma thinks, but does not say. Kakashi's gaze returns, cool and unsettlingly honest. "When I look at most people, I already know what they'll do. With you, I don't." That is as close to fascination as someone like Kakashi may ever come. Asuma turns the words over carefully. In another timeline, perhaps this rivalry becomes straightforward. Two gifted boys. Competition. Respect. Growth. But this world is already skewing off course, and relationships here will not stay innocent if power begins collecting around them. Even now, he can feel how easily this could become something larger. A bond, a fault line, an obsession. An alliance adults might try to weaponize. He decides, in that moment, that if Kakashi is going to remain in his orbit, it cannot be left to chance, not controlled, guided. A dangerous idea. Probably a necessary one. They continue training in fragments after that. Not regularly enough to invite formal notice, but often enough that a pattern begins forming. Kakashi teaches without admitting he is teaching. Asuma adapts without pretending he is not learning. Their contests move from simple reaction and balance into timing, spatial control, reading shoulders and hips before the strike truly begins. The result is immediate. Asuma improves faster, too fast. He feels it in the way his body starts translating thought into action with fewer delays, in the way mistakes stop repeating, in the way his concept of a blade ceases to be abstraction and starts becoming instinctive geometry. And that, in turn, creates a new problem. People notice acceleration even when they miss the work that caused it. The first rumor reaches him indirectly, in the manner all rumors do, through adults careless enough to speak near walls they believe unimportant. Gifted, unusual, like his father, like the Hatake boy. The phrases are mild on their own. Together they are a warning bell, because once the village starts placing children into categories, the categories become roads. Prodigy, clan heir, future jonin, political asset, sacrifice, none of them are neutral. Then another name begins circling closer around his own. Danzo. Never loudly, never in a way that can be challenged, just enough to make the back of his neck go cold when he hears it. Interested in the next generation. Concerned with the village's future. Observing talent. The language is always so reasonable when monsters introduce themselves through institutions. Asuma keeps his face empty when he overhears it. Inside, his thoughts sharpen into something dangerous. Danzo is no longer just a future threat sitting somewhere down the line of canon. He is an active pressure in the present. A man already searching the village for pieces to place before anyone else understands the board. And if Danzo sees usefulness in him, time becomes much shorter than he wanted it to be. That knowledge pushes him into a new phase of training. No longer simply stronger, safer. He begins focusing on concealment within performance. How to appear winded before he truly is. How to leave an effort looking like his limit. How to reveal progress in ways that can be explained by noble lineage and strong tutoring rather than something stranger. At the same time, he works harder in private than ever before. Control drills until his hands ache. Balance work until his calves burn. Wooden weapon patterns until the motion begins echoing through him even in sleep. And under all of it, a quiet determination hardens into decision. He will not be shaped by fear alone. Hiruzen's warning stays with him. Strength sought only from terror becomes a cage. Fine. Then fear can be the spark, not the engine. What drives him after that must be larger. Choice, agency, the ability to intervene before the world closes around him. Because the more he sees of Konoha, the more he understands. The true danger is not one battle, or one enemy, or even one timeline gone wrong. It is drift. The slow surrender of future to systems built by older hands. He sees it in meetings he cannot hear but can feel the weight of, in glances exchanged when certain clans are mentioned, in the careful, smiling language adults use when speaking of duty, as though duty is not often just a prettier word for loss. The village is already becoming what it will one day be, and somewhere inside that transformation, boys like him and Kakashi are being measured for where they will fit. That thought follows him into the next turning point. Not a battlefield, not an exam, a conversation, one he is not meant to hear, but does. It happens near dusk, when the light has gone copper and long shadows make the interior corridors of the Sarutobi compound feel narrower than they are. Voices carry from a room partly open to the garden. Hiruzen's is unmistakable, low and steady. The other voice is softer, older, edged with political caution. They are speaking about appointments, about optics, about the fire court, about the need to manage perception around the Hokage's household, while the village enters a more delicate phase. Then comes the line that stops him completely. If the boy continues like this, others will begin making plans around him. The response takes a second. I know, Hiruzen says, not denial, not confusion, recognition. Asuma stands motionless in the shadow of the hall, the meaning sinking into him one cold layer at a time. Others are already making plans. Not for some future Jonin Asuma might become. For the child he is now. The moment feels strangely quiet. No alarm, no revelation thunder, just certainty. He is no longer early. The game has already started. And if that is true, then childhood as a shield is over whether anyone says so or not. Which means his next choices cannot be reactive anymore. They have to be strategic. Somewhere ahead lie academy years, alliances, rivalries that will harden into loyalties, and a version of Konoha diverging farther and farther from the one he remembers. Somewhere ahead, Danzo will make his move. Orochimaru will become more than a name on the edge of memory, and the village's hidden machinery will start demanding payment from everyone inside it. But before any of that, there is a nearer threshold. The one where talent stops being anecdote and becomes identity. The one where the children around him begin choosing not just what they can do, but who they will become next to him. That change arrives with the academy. Not all at once, not in some grand procession where childhood gives way to ambition beneath ceremonial banners. It happens in pieces. A classroom. A training yard. Shared routines repeated often enough that masks begin to form before anyone realizes they are wearing them. For most children, the academy is where talent is identified. For Asuma, it is where trajectories begin colliding. By the time he enters, he already understands more than he should. Not just about chakra, movement, and control, but about people. About how groups harden around competence, how insecurity dresses itself up as cruelty. How admiration and resentment can grow out of the same glance. The academy gives all of that structure. From the first weeks, he can feel the village sorting its future. Quiet children with too much discipline. Loud children hiding fear behind performance. Clan heirs carrying expectations they did not choose. Others with no famous name at all pushing twice as hard because they know talent alone may not be enough to save them from being overlooked. And through all of it, Asuma feels the pressure of being watched in a new way. Not like a child in a household anymore, like a standard, the Hokage's son. The phrase goes ahead of him into rooms. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it isolates. Usually it does both. Teachers are careful around him, though not always in the same direction. A few expect brilliance before he speaks. A few seem almost determined to prove that lineage alone means nothing. The smarter ones do neither. They simply observe, patient and unreadable, waiting to see whether he will become the kind of prodigy Konoha celebrates or the kind it fears. He gives them something in between, good enough to confirm expectation, controlled enough to avoid feeding it too quickly. But the real transformation of the academy has nothing to do with teachers. It is the network forming around him. Kakashi is still there, sharper than ever, moving through training with the same unsettling economy that makes every exercise look like preparation for something harsher. He wins too often, too cleanly, and carries those victories with the detached air of someone who has already grown tired of proving himself. That detachment only makes other children react more strongly. Some gravitate toward him. Most keep their distance. Asuma does neither. Their rivalry is too established now to be mistaken for chance, but too quiet to be called friendship by anyone watching from outside. They compete in drills, in control, in speed, and the subtle war of reading intent before movement fully commits. Neither gives the other easy ground. Neither fully disengages. And because the academy is the kind of place where repetition becomes myth with alarming speed, everyone begins noticing. Not in formal announcements, in whispers. Hatake, Sarutobi, which one is better? The question moves through the students like dry grass catching sparks. Asuma pretends not to hear it. Kakashi, if he hears it, gives no sign. But the question changes the social field around them anyway. Children start measuring themselves by where they fit relative to one, or both, of them. That is how factions begin long before anyone uses the word. The first person to approach Asuma with more direct intent is not someone he expected. Gecko, quiet, watchful, with the kind of stillness that suggests a mind always storing more than it says aloud. Not flashy, not eager for attention. The sort of child many overlook until he speaks with enough precision to make them realize he's been understanding the room the whole time. Their first real conversation begins after a sparring session where Asuma wins, but only narrowly, and only because he changes rhythm halfway through rather than forcing a straightforward exchange. Gecko, standing nearby, says, "You dislike repeating the same answer twice." Asuma turns, more amused than alarmed. That's a strange way to describe fighting. It's accurate. There is no challenge in the boy's tone, just observation. That alone makes him interesting. Asuma studies him. "And what does that say about you?" Gecko shrugs lightly. "That I was paying attention." The answer is dry enough to invite a smile. More importantly, it reveals another useful truth. Gecko does not seem interested in status. He is interested in patterns. Children like that can become dangerous in one of two ways. Either as enemies who see too much, or as allies who understand without needing everything explained. Asuma decides quickly which outcome he prefers. Their conversations remain sparse at first, but that sparsity becomes its own kind of trust. Gecko does not demand performance. He asks sharp questions when he has them, says nothing when he does not, and learns with the quiet efficiency of someone already suspicious of easy conclusions. Kusei is different. Where Gecko is still water, Kusei is motion. Fast to react, quick to grin, quicker still to turn tension into challenge. He enters Asuma's orbit through competition rather than conversation, with the straightforward instincts of someone who believes that if another child is strong, the only sensible response is to test him directly. Their first clash leaves both of them dirtied and irritated. Their second ends in laughter. That too matters. Because Kusei brings something the others do not, momentum. He makes still rooms move. He draws people in. Around children like him, groups form more easily, and Asuma understands almost immediately that if he wants a circle rather than an isolated reputation, this kind of personality is indispensable. So, without ever announcing it, he begins allowing one to form. Not a clique, not yet. Something looser, shared training, shared meals, repeated proximity becoming habit. And at the edge of that growing orbit, another figure appears whose presence lands with far more emotional weight than most of the others. Obito. The first time Asuma truly sees him, the feeling is stranger than recognition. Because memory has prepared him for a tragedy before it prepared him for a person. In the story he once knew, Obito becomes symbol, wound, warning. A boy swallowed by larger machinery until what remains is barely recognizable. But the child standing here is none of those things yet. He is laid to something, flushed from hurrying, carrying frustration like an extra layer of heat around him. Loud in the unpolished way children often are when they are trying not to be dismissed. Emotional, earnest, achingly easy to underestimate, which means Asuma has to fight the instinct to look at him like a problem from the future. That would be unfair. It would also be dangerous. Because if this timeline is already changing, then Obito is no fixed point. He is a possibility. Many possibilities, perhaps. And how people treat a child long before disaster may matter more than any grand intervention later. Obito notices him staring and immediately bristles. What? The response almost catches Asuma off guard. Not because it is rude, but because it is so alive. So far from the haunted image memory keeps trying to overlay on him. Nothing, Asuma says. That didn't look like nothing. Kusei snorts. He looks at everyone like he's measuring them. Obito crosses his arms. That's annoying. It probably is, Asuma says. For a second, it seems like the exchange will sharpen into hostility. Then Obito huffs out something halfway between irritation and reluctant amusement, and the moment slides past. Small. Unimportant. Exactly the kind of moment that sometimes changes everything, because after that, Obito keeps ending up near them, sometimes by choice, sometimes by the natural gravity of training groups and overlapping schedules. But enough that Asuma starts seeing the shape of him more clearly. He works hard, harder than people give him credit for. He burns hot, speaks before thinking, cares too openly, and gets wounded by dismissal in ways he tries desperately to hide. And there, beneath all the noise, is the reason Asuma cannot afford to treat him casually. Children like Obito do not break because they are weak. They break because they want so badly to matter that the wrong hand, at the wrong time, can turn that hunger into catastrophe. As the weeks and then months unfold, the academy ceases to be a place of isolated lessons and becomes something more dangerous, a proving ground for future alignments. Asuma feels it in the way his small circle starts defining itself in contrast to the rest of the class. Gekko's quiet perception, Kusei's kinetic confidence, Obito's emotional stubbornness, Kakashi's cold brilliance hovering nearby, never fully inside and never fully outside. The combination is unstable, which makes it powerful. He does not plan them as some childhood team. That would be too deliberate, too visible. But he does begin nudging things when he can. A training suggestion here, a pair up there. A conversation redirected before pride can turn it into resentment. Not manipulation in the crude sense, steering. And every time it works, a deeper realization takes hold. This is how timelines change, not only through wars, through repeated small choices that alter who learns to trust whom before the real pressure begins. That insight changes the way he trains as well. Before, improvement was personal, a private shield against the future he feared. Now it becomes connective. His blade work advances in strange early stages. Still with wood, still disguised as Harma's preference whenever possible, but far more disciplined now. He begins thinking not only about how a weapon extends his body, but how it controls a field around him. Angles, entry points, threat zones, the places where an opponent's confidence can be broken not by force, but by certainty that stepping forward means injury. The idea fascinates him. It also isolates him a little. Because while other children think in terms of winning a clash, he is increasingly thinking in terms of governing space, of shaping choices before the strike even comes. That is not normal for his age. He knows it. The trick is learning how to carry the thought without exposing the depth behind it. Kakashi notices anyway. Of course he does. One afternoon, after a series of drills, Kakashi says, "You don't fight the person. You fight where they're going." Asuma wipes sweat from his brow and glances at him. That sounds like a compliment. It isn't. No? It means you expect people to commit before they do. The line is so exact it feels less like observation and more like dissection. Asuma studies him in return. And you don't? Kakashi's answer comes flat and immediate. I expect them to be wrong. That should sound arrogant. In him, it sounds almost clinical. Asuma cannot help the faint smile that follows. That seems lonely. For the first time in a while, Kakashi goes still in a different way, not poised, not calculating, exposed. Only for a heartbeat, but enough. Then the moment closes and he says, being right is usually lonely. The answer lingers long after the training ends, because it reveals the wound beneath the skill more clearly than Kakashi probably intended. And once Asuma sees it, he cannot unsee it. This boy is becoming extraordinary inside a shell that keeps everyone from reaching him. If no one interrupts that process, the shell will harden, then deepen, then decide it was never meant to be broken at all. That cannot be allowed. Not if Asuma wants any hope of changing where this future leads. So he begins making a different kind of effort. Not overt warmth. That would only make Kakashi retreat faster. Instead, consistency. Present but not invasive. Competitive without cruelty. The kind of repeated contact that tells someone, without ever saying it directly, that being understood does not always come with a price. It works slowly. Painfully slowly. But slowly is still movement. The greater shock comes from the academy itself, beginning to diverge in ways even his broad memory cannot cleanly predict. A teacher appears who should not matter this much, yet does. A set of exercises are introduced earlier than they should be. Students from certain clans are grouped together more deliberately. Rumors move through the building about policy changes, about accelerated tracks, about interest from people higher up who are paying closer attention to select children than usual. Asuma hears all of it and feels something cold settle in his chest. The system is shifting around them, which means this is no longer merely an altered path. It is an altered machine. And if the machine is changing early, then so are the hands guiding it. Danzo's name remains mostly unspoken, but his presence starts becoming easier to feel in the absences around conversation. The way certain adults stop just short of saying too much. The way specific talented children begin drawing unusual scrutiny. The way the village's future gets invoked with increasing frequency whenever people want to make something sound noble that is probably much darker underneath. Asuma hates how quickly he has learned to recognize that language. It makes him older inside than he wants to be. Even so, the academy gives him one thing he did not fully anticipate. Joy. Not constant, not innocent, but real. There are moments when training with the others, when the world shrinks back down to effort, breath, speed, laughter, irritation, bruised pride, and the simple exhilaration of getting better in the presence of people who matter. Moments when Kusei says something ridiculous and even Gecko almost smiles. Moments when Obito storms off after losing, only to come back the next day, more determined than before. Moments when Kakashi, against all apparent instinct, chooses to remain beside them a little longer than necessary. In those moments, Asuma glimpses the other future, the one that might have been possible for all of them if the world were kinder. That vision is dangerous in its own way, because it gives him something more than fear to fight for. And the instant that shift happens, his choices stop being only defensive. He begins looking farther ahead. Not just at himself, but at the structures surrounding them. Who influences which instructors? Which clans are growing more tense? Which children already carry the burden of family politics on their backs? Which names keep surfacing together in adult conversation? Hyuga appears more often than he expected, not yet in open conflict, not yet in crisis. But enough to tell him that whatever version of Konoha this is becoming, clan balance will matter earlier than he once assumed. So will Orochimaru. That name reaches him first as a tone change in adult speech. Respect mixed with caution. Admiration sharpened by something less comfortable underneath. A mind too brilliant to be discussed casually. A figure still within the village's accepted order, but already carrying the kind of myth that unsettles even those who praise him. Asuma hears the name and feels immediate unease. Because genius in this world is rarely allowed to remain neutral. It gets drawn toward obsession, toward institution, toward the places where brilliance and monstrosity become hard to separate. The fact that the name is surfacing this early tells him something he does not want to admit. The darker machinery of the village may be closer to the children than anyone wants to say. That realization matures him all over again. No more illusions that he has years before the board becomes dangerous. No more belief that if he simply grows stronger, he can wait for history to arrive. History is already here. It is in the academy, in the clans, in the men whose names lower voices, in the way children are praised for becoming useful before they are old enough to understand what usefulness will cost them. One evening, after a longer day of drills, he remains behind on the training ground while the others drift away in ones and twos. The light is dimming. Dust hangs low in the air. The silence after repeated exertion feels almost sacred. Obito has already gone, muttering about proving something tomorrow. Kusei left with his usual restless energy, promising a rematch to someone. Gecko disappeared so quietly that even now Asuma is not entirely sure when. Kakashi lingers at the edge, as though deciding whether staying counts as a choice. Asuma lifts the wooden blade again, moving through a slower pattern now, refining line and step rather than speed. Not for display, for memory. For the body to keep learning after the mind is tired. After a while, Kakashi says, you do that when you're thinking. Asuma does not stop. Do what? Train slower. That earns a brief exhale that might almost be a laugh. Maybe I'm fixing mistakes. Kakashi watches the motion of the blade. No, you're building something. The words settle into the evening air. For a few seconds, Asuma says nothing. Then he lowers the weapon and looks at the silver-haired boy across the fading light. Yes, he says, I am. Kakashi's expression does not change, but the stillness in him sharpens with recognition. Not of the thing itself, perhaps, but of the fact that there is indeed a thing, a design, an intention, something future-facing and deliberate inside all this childhood effort. He does not ask what it is. That, more than anything, feels like trust. And in that silence, with dusk folding the academy into shadow around them, Asuma understands the truth of where he stands. The circle around him is no longer accidental. The path ahead is no longer private. The alternate timeline is not simply unfolding, it is organizing. And soon, very soon, children will stop being treated like children and start being drawn toward the first real shape of the village's ambitions. When that happens, bonds will either deepen or be claimed by someone else first. That shift begins so gradually that most of the children around him do not recognize it until they are already inside it. The academy remains the academy on the surface. Lessons continue. Sparring continues. Teachers correct posture, chakra flow, timing, discipline. Children still complain, compete, boast, sulk, recover. But beneath that ordinary rhythm, something harder has entered the air. Selection. Not official, not yet. No lists pinned to walls. No declarations from the Hokage's office. Just the subtle sorting of futures. Some students start receiving slightly different attention. Certain drills become more advanced for no stated reason. Some names are spoken more often in the staff room, in the corridors, in the careful conversations adults think young ears cannot decode. It is not blatant enough to challenge. That is exactly what makes it effective. Asuma sees it everywhere now. Kakashi is being pushed, though not openly. Tasks arrive around him that are a little too precise, a little too efficient, a little too revealing of how much adults already expect. Gecko is watched by the kind of instructors who value perception more than flash. Kusei earns attention whenever raw force or aggression needs a vessel. Obito, for all the ways he is dismissed, is being measured too less kindly, more skeptically, but measured all the same. And Asuma? Asuma is beginning to draw the kind of interest that doesn't come from teachers alone. That becomes clear the day he is summoned, not formally, but with enough quiet insistence to make refusal impossible, to a smaller training space near one of the administrative buildings. Not the Hokage's office, not a public yard either, somewhere in between. The kind of place used when the village wishes to examine talent without giving the impression that examination is taking place. The jonin waiting there wears politeness like armor, not hostile, not warm. Simply professional in the careful way that tells Asuma this is not a personal visit. We'd like to see how you think under pressure, the man says. There it is. The village's favorite word when responsibility needs to blur itself into process. Asuma nods as though the request makes perfect sense, because for a child in his position, it does. The son of the Hokage is not allowed the luxury of surprise. Every answer he gives to pressure now becomes part of a file he will never read. The exercise begins simply enough. Movement through marked space. Reaction to shifting signals. Chakra control under mild disruption. None of it is beyond him. That is not the point. The point is to see what instincts emerge when the structure stops being clean. So he lets them see some of it. Adaptation, restraint, awareness of angles before movement commits. He makes mistakes where useful, corrects quickly where safe. Avoids any display so sharp that it would invite questions no one should be asking yet. Still, by the end, the jonin's expression has changed in that small, dangerous way adults change when a conclusion has been reached. You plan ahead, the man says. Asuma lowers his eyes with practiced modesty. I don't like being surprised. The jonin's mouth almost curves. No, I don't think you do. Nothing else is said. He is dismissed with calm approval. The encounter folded back into the village's machinery so neatly that no one could point to it as unusual. But Asuma walks away with a colder certainty than before. The machinery has stopped observing from a distance. It is touching the board now. That evening, Hiruzen is quieter than usual at home, not suspiciously quiet, thoughtful. The kind of inward stillness that means he is weighing too many variables at once and refusing to let any of them touch his face completely. Asuma notices it immediately, because he has spent enough years now learning the difference between a father at rest and a Hokage in disguise. They share a meal. Small conversation. the ordinary scaffolding of domestic life. Then Hiruzen says, almost as if commenting on the weather, some of the instructors think highly of you. Asuma keeps his expression neutral. That sounds dangerous. The answer slips out before he can soften it, too honest and too old in shape for a child's voice. For a second, Hiruzen just looks at him. Then, unexpectedly, he smiles. Yes, he says, it often is. The room goes still around that admission. There are many ways Hiruzen could have handled this conversation. Reassurance, deflection, pride. Instead, he chooses truth thin enough to be survivable. That tells Asuma everything he needs to know. The danger is real, the attention is growing, and Hiruzen knows it well enough not to pretend otherwise. What happens, Asuma asks carefully, when people think highly of the wrong things? Hiruzen sets down his cup. The answer takes longer this time. They try to claim them, he says. There is no point pretending he does not understand. They are speaking in layers now, and both of them know it. A father and son on the surface. A leader and a future asset beneath it. Something more fragile than either in between. And if those things don't want to be claimed, Asuma asks. Hiruzen's gaze rests on him, heavy with more feeling than he lets into his voice. Then they need judgment as much as strength. The line follows Asuma long after the conversation ends, not because he disagrees, because it is the kind of wisdom that only matters when the world has already become dangerous enough to require it. From there, the pressure begins widening outward. Clan tensions that once sat at the edge of his awareness start stepping closer into view. The Hyuga, in particular, become impossible to ignore, not because some open crisis has erupted, but because the village keeps circling them in conversation, the way people circle a sealed blade. They are not sure whether to praise or fear, duty, inheritance, structure, discipline. The same words return again and again whenever the Hyuga are discussed by adults. Clean words, respectable words, and yet every time Asuma hears them, he also hears what is missing. Freedom, warmth, choice. He is still too young to enter the center of those matters, but he does not need access to understand the pattern. Clan politics in Konoha are not side details, they are fault lines. Controlled ones, buried ones, but fault lines all the same. The village survives by balancing them, exploiting them, soothing them, and pretending none of those things are happening at once. Children raised inside those structures learn to carry tension before they know the language for it. That fact matters more to him now than ever, because the bonds forming around him cannot remain untouched by clan reality forever. Obito carries the Uchiha name, whether he wants to or not. Others carry burdens quieter but no less heavy. Even Kakashi, with no clan politics wrapped around him in the same way, bears the pressure of legacy so intensely it may as well be bloodline law, and all of them are still children. Asuma begins noticing where training changes people emotionally, not just physically. Who withdraws after failure? Who grows reckless after praise? Who laughs harder when they are afraid? Who grows silent when certain families are mentioned? The information accumulates almost without effort now, because he has crossed some invisible threshold where observation is no longer something he does on purpose. It is simply how he survives. He hates that a little. Hates how natural this is becoming. But hatred does not make it less useful. By then, Orochimaru's presence in his life changes from rumor to shadow. He does not meet the man directly at first. He hears him before he sees him, in the altered tone adults use, in the slight sharpening of attention whenever a conversation drifts toward research, innovation, or difficult techniques. Orochimaru is spoken of with admiration just controlled enough to hide discomfort, and discomfort just controlled enough to sound like respect. Then one day, during a visit to one of the more formal training areas attached to the village's upper structure, Asuma catches sight of him. The impression is immediate and wrong in a way that makes the skin tighten. Orochimaru does not look openly monstrous. That would be easier. No, what unsettles him is the composure, the smoothness of it. A calm so complete it feels less like self-control and more like distance from ordinary human temperature altogether. His eyes move over people as if cataloging possibilities rather than seeing them. He pauses only briefly near a group of instructors, says something soft, receives something like deference in return. Then those pale, unreadable eyes drift. Not long, not obviously, but enough. Toward the students, toward the future, toward him. Asuma does not react, not outwardly. Inside, the air seems to thin, because Danzo's attention is one kind of danger, institutional. Controlled. A blade hidden in governance. Orochimaru is another kind entirely. Curiosity without moral brakes, genius loosened from ordinary restraint. A mind that sees human beings and immediately begins imagining what could be made from them if one stopped caring where the line was. The glance passes. Nothing happens. Which is precisely what makes it terrifying. Later, Kakashi notices the change in him before anyone else does. They are sparring with wooden weapons again, though the exchange is sharper now than it once was. Not because of anger. Because both of them have progressed enough that restraint requires more attention than aggression. Kakashi catches a deflection, pivots, and pulls back just before the counter would have clipped Asuma's shoulder. "You're distracted." "No," Asuma says automatically. Kakashi's stare is flat. That means yes. Asuma exhales and lowers the weapon. There is no point pretending with him for long. "I saw someone I didn't like." "Who?" He almost says the name. Almost. But names have weight, and speaking some of them aloud feels too much like opening doors. "Someone dangerous," he says instead. Kakashi studies him for a beat, then says, "There are a lot of those." The answer is so dry, so completely lacking in childish surprise, that Asuma nearly laughs again. "Nearly. Yes," he says, "there are." Kakashi plants the wooden blade in the dirt beside him and folds his arms. "Then which kind?" The question lands deeper than intended. Not dangerous. How? Dangerous in what direction? Useful distinction. Vital distinction. Asuma thinks of Danzo and feels cold, thinks of Orochimaru and feels something closer to revulsion. "The kind that looks at people," he says slowly, "and only sees what they could be used for." Kakashi goes very still. Too still. For a moment, Asuma wonders what line he has just crossed. Then he remembers who sits across from him, and the answer becomes obvious. Kakashi knows exactly what that kind of danger feels like, not perhaps in full adult terms, but enough. Enough to recognize being measured rather than seen. Enough to know that praise can become possession if the wrong person is offering it. When Kakashi finally speaks, his voice is quieter than usual. Then don't let them look too long. It is simple advice. It is also, perhaps, the most intimate thing Kakashi has ever given him. The problem, of course, is that hiding is becoming harder. Asuma's skill is no longer easy to flatten into normalcy. Not because he has lost control over his image, but because his body is beginning to catch up to his mind in ways that make improvement visible no matter how carefully he manages it. His movement is cleaner. His balance more exact. His chakra use more natural. In combat drills, he sees openings earlier than most others, and even when he chooses not to exploit them fully, the recognition alone changes how he moves. Teachers notice, students notice, the village notices. And as the village notices, the small circle around him becomes more defined in response. Kusei grows more openly loyal, though he would never use that word. In his own mind, it is simpler than that. Strength recognizes strength. Effort respects effort. A person worth standing beside is a person worth testing, arguing with, and defending all at once. Kusei brings force to the group, but also heat, the kind that can stop silence from becoming isolation. Gecko remains the observer, the one who notices currents before they crest. More than once he says almost nothing, yet positions himself at exactly the right angle in a conversation or confrontation to keep something from turning worse. Asuma begins trusting that instinct more than he says aloud. Obito is harder because he wants so visibly, wants to improve, wants to matter, wants to stop arriving behind everyone else. Sometimes that want makes him admirable. Sometimes it makes him volatile. More than once he flares against Kakashi's cool superiority, or bristles at some imagined slight, and then trains himself to exhaustion afterward, as if bruised pride can be beaten into strength by sheer repetition. Asuma watches that and feels dread creeping in around the edges, because this, too, is how disaster begins, not with evil, with hunger left unguarded long enough that the wrong voice can feed it, so he intervenes where he can, though intervention still looks like ordinary friendship from the outside. A redirect here, a challenge there, a refusal to let Obito spiral alone after a bad day. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it only delays the darker mood from taking root. Still, delay matters. Delay can become change. And then there is Kakashi, who remains the axis around which too many futures seem to tilt. Their rivalry deepens because it has nowhere else to go. They are no longer merely testing speed or instinct. They are shaping each other by contact. Kakashi's precision forces Asuma to refine. Asuma's adaptability forces Kakashi to think beyond straight-line superiority. Every exchange teaches them both something they would not have learned alone. The strange part is that beneath all the competition, trust is forming, uneven, mostly unspoken, but real. It reveals itself in the smallest ways. Kakashi choosing to remain nearby after others leave. Asuma asking fewer false questions and getting straighter answers in return. Silences that no longer need to be filled. One evening, after a hard series of drills, they sit at the edge of the field with enough distance between them to keep the moment from becoming sentimental. The sky is dimming. The village hums farther off. For once, neither of them seems eager to move. Kakashi says, without looking at him, if people are planning around us, then getting stronger won't stop that. Asuma turns toward him slowly. The line is too sharp, too directly aligned with his own thoughts to be accidental. You've been thinking about that too, he says. Kakashi's expression does not change. I think about most things. That is not an answer. It is also, somehow, exactly one. Asuma lets the silence stretch. Then, number. Strength alone won't stop it. Then what will? There are many possible answers. Distance, defiance, power, reputation, escape, all of them incomplete. Choosing before they choose for us, Asuma says. Kakashi finally looks at him. For a long second, there is no boyishness in his face at all. Only intelligence and fatigue in the beginning of something that might one day become either leadership or isolation, depending on who reaches him first. Then he nods once. Not agreement exactly, recognition. That moment should feel like progress. Instead, it feels like the edge of a cliff. Because once children begin thinking like this about institutions, selection, ownership, the shape of power around them, some part of childhood is already lost, and the village does not give lost things back. Soon after, the darkness stops staying at the edge of events and starts touching them directly, not through violence, not yet, through invitation. A recommendation arrives for advanced exposure to certain training concepts. Nothing formal enough to challenge, nothing sinister enough to refuse, just the sort of opportunity that looks like honor from a distance and recruitment from up close. It is not directed only at Asuma, but he is among those named. So is Kakashi, 2 others as well. The list is short, carefully chosen. 2 carefully chosen. Asuma reads between the lines immediately. This is how influence enters without announcing itself. Offer access, offer prestige, offer the feeling of being seen. The children will step forward on their own, and the village can tell itself no coercion occurred. Hiruzen's face gives little away when the recommendation reaches the household, but little is not nothing. Asuma catches it in the slight set of his shoulders, the measured pace of his response, the way a father's concern is being forced to coexist with a Hokage's understanding that some doors cannot be closed without consequence. You don't have to accept everything offered to you, Hiruzen says. It is the closest thing to permission he can safely give. Asuma holds the line of his father's gaze and hears the rest unsaid. But refusing the wrong offer can reveal just as much as accepting it, so the choice is no choice at all. He will step close enough to see the hand extending the invitation, and then decide how far the fingers are already closing. The night before that next stage begins, sleep does not come easily. His thoughts turn through too many faces. Danzo, Orochimaru, Hiruzen, Kakashi, Obito. The village itself, vast and hungry beneath all its rituals of duty. He thinks of the lives ahead of them if nothing changes. He thinks of the lives ahead of them if he changes too much. He thinks of how narrow the path is between invisibility and capture, between intervention and arrogance, between protecting people and deciding for them what their future should be. By dawn, one truth remains. He is no longer reacting to the ultimate timeline. He is inside its engine now. The next phase will not simply test how strong he has become. It will test whether the bonds he has built can survive contact with the people and systems already trying to shape them. And if they cannot, then the village will start claiming its future piece by piece until all that remains of childhood is the illusion that any of them ever had a choice at all. The next morning arrives too cleanly for the kind of day it is about to become. Sunlight spills across the village roofs. The air is mild. Market voices rise in the distance with the same ordinary rhythm they always have. From far enough away, Konoha looks like peace. Asuma has lived long enough inside it now to know better. Peace here is rarely the absence of danger. More often, it is the mask danger wears while deciding where to place its next hand. He walks toward the appointed training grounds with that thought fixed firmly in his mind. No escorts, no ceremony. Just a small set of names quietly selected, each one moving through the morning under different assumptions about what this invitation means. Advancement, recognition, opportunity, the village's trust. Asuma suspects the truth is more complicated than all of them. Kakashi is already there when he arrives, of course, standing still enough to look almost bored, though the stillness carries that familiar charge he has come to recognize, a mind already working through variables before anyone gives him reason to. Gecko stands off to one side, silent and observant as ever. Kusei looks restless, trying not to show that the unusual nature of the gathering has already put him on edge. Obito arrives a little later, jaw set, pride alone dragging him forward against the possibility that this might be another moment where everyone expects him to fall behind. They are children. That thought lands harder this morning than it ever has before. Children, and already arranged like pieces. The instructors waiting for them make no effort to hide the seriousness of the day. There are fewer of them than expected, which tells Asuma immediately that this is not about broad academy development. It is about select potential, about evaluation under conditions too specialized to be called ordinary training and too controlled to be admitted as anything else. The lead instructor speaks in the clipped, measured tone of someone used to being obeyed. You were chosen because each of you shows promise beyond standard progression. There it is. Chosen, not invited, not encouraged, chosen. The word settles differently on every face. Kusei stands a little taller. Obito tries not to look relieved. Gekko gives almost nothing away. Kakashi remains unreadable. Asuma feels the shape of a trap clarifying. The first exercises are exactly the sort of thing he expected. Advanced control, rapid response scenarios, shifting tactical problems meant to expose instinct rather than rehearsed answers. Individually, none of them are unreasonable. Together, they form a sharper truth. This is not training alone. It is profiling. Who leads under uncertainty? Who overcommits? Who freezes? Who adapts? Who watches others instead of only the target? Who follows strength? Who resents it? Asuma sees the instructors taking mental notes long before any slate or report appears. And more importantly, he sees how carefully the children around him are being taught to reveal themselves. Kakashi performs with cold excellence. Not flashy, not hungry for praise, just efficient in a way that makes most problems collapse the moment they touch him. It would be easy to mistake that for invulnerability if Asuma did not know how much isolation such competence can create. Kusei attacks every challenge with force and directness, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes too quickly, but always with enough conviction to make people want him pointed in a direction. Gekko is subtler. He notices patterns early, adjusts without announcing it, and solves problems by seeing structure where others only see tasks. Asuma catches more than one instructor watching him with interest too specific to be casual. Obito struggles at first. That is the problem with environments like this. They are built to magnify confidence in those already accustomed to being seen, and magnify frustration in those who are not. Obito hesitates once, overcompensates the second time, and by the third drill he is burning with that particular mixture of anger and self-reproach that makes every failure feel witnessed twice. Asuma notices it before anyone else does. Maybe because he has been watching for it. Maybe because part of him has been afraid this moment would come from the day he first saw the boy. In one scenario, this becomes a quiet humiliation. The kind a child never forgets. The kind that teaches him strength belongs only to those who are already chosen. Asuma cannot allow that lesson to take root. So when the next exercise begins, a coordinated movement problem where spacing, timing, and split-second decision-making matter more than raw speed, he does something small that changes the whole shape of it. He shifts half a step wider than he needs to. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to create an opening Obito can take. Obito sees it late, but he sees it, drives through, covers the angle, the formation holds, the drill succeeds. One of the instructors nods approvingly at the group result, probably marking it down as teamwork. Only Kakashi glances at Asuma with the faintest narrowing of the eyes. He noticed. Of course he did. The next drill is more difficult. Rotating pair pressure. A simulation of threat emergence from multiple directions. Timing windows so tight they punish pride and uncertainty equally. This time, Obito nearly misses again, and Kusei's instinct is to compensate with force, which would have worked on a real battlefield and failed the structure of the exercise completely. Asuma intervenes with one clipped instruction, sharper than he would normally use in front of adults. Left, now. The word lands with enough authority that both boys move. The sequence stabilizes. Again, the drill holds. Again, the instructors take note. Again, Kakashi looks at him. Not surprised, not exactly, but with the kind of cold attention that means a new conclusion has been added to the file he keeps in his own head. The morning stretches on like that, each scenario a little more revealing than the last, until the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. They are not being tested only as individuals, they are being tested in relation to one another. Compatibility, influence, potential combinations. Asuma feels anger stirring low and steady beneath his focus. There it is, the machinery in plain view at last. The village does not merely identify talent, it studies how talent can be arranged. That realization follows him into the final exercise of the day, and that is the one that matters most. They are led farther out, beyond the simpler training spaces, into a section of wooded ground broken by shallow elevation changes and old markers half hidden by roots and weather. The kind of terrain where mistakes stop looking instructional and start feeling real. The lead instructor addresses them without ceremony. You have one objective. Reach the marked point beyond the ridge and retrieve the signal tag. Opposition will attempt to stop you. Work however you think best. No teams are assigned, no roles defined. That is the true test. Not just whether they can fight, whether they can choose each other under pressure. The moment the exercise begins, the group fractures exactly as the instructors likely hoped it would. Kusei wants momentum. Obito wants not to be left behind. Gekko wants information first. Kakashi is already assessing lines of attack and probable ambush angles before anyone speaks. Asuma looks at all of them and understands something with absolute clarity. If they do this the way the village expects, the result will be useful data for the village and a step toward ownership of all their futures. If they do it his way, the result becomes something else. Choice. We go together, he says. Kusei bristles immediately. That slows us down. No, Asuma replies. It forces them to deal with all of us at once. Gekko, predictably, sees the logic first. There's more than one observer line. Kakashi's eyes flick through the trees. Yes? Obito, breathing a little too fast but refusing to show it, says, then why are we standing still? That decides it. They move, not cleanly at first. That would be impossible. They are too young, too newly aligned, too different in instinct. Kusei surges ahead and has to be reined in by necessity. Obito pushes harder every time he senses doubt near him. Gekko keeps identifying structure no one else catches. Kakashi cuts through confusion with unnerving precision whenever the path threatens to collapse entirely. And Asuma? Asuma does what he has been building toward without fully admitting it to himself. He shapes space, not just physically, though the footwork and blade thinking are there even now in embryonic form. More than that, he keeps the group from breaking where the pressure wants it broken. He redirects force into timing, hesitation into movement, pride into function. The first ambush comes from the right flank, fast and expertly disguised. Chunin-level suppression, controlled enough not to injure them seriously, but clean enough to punish disorganization. Kakashi reacts first, naturally. Too first, perhaps. He cuts toward the threat line with brilliant speed and nearly opens a gap behind him in the process. Asuma sees it immediately and moves to close the space before the second instructor can exploit it. Wood cracks against wood. Impact jolts through his arms. He pivots, not blocking so much as changing the angle of failure, just enough to buy time for Kusei to crash into the line with all the force subtlety never gave him. It works. Not beautifully, but it works. Then the second pressure wave hits from the rear and Obito freezes for half a beat, just long enough for every one of Asuma's buried fears to flash through him at once. Not again. Not this pattern. Not this story. Move, Asuma snaps. Obito does. Too hard, too emotionally, but he does. Drives through the opening with reckless commitment, recovers badly, then recovers the recovery with sheer stubborn will. It is messy. It is human. It is enough. Gekko, of all people, is the one who saves the sequence after that. He catches the hidden route up the ridge before the rest of them lose a full minute to the false trail. Says only, there, and vanishes into motion so quickly that the others have no choice but to follow or be left behind. It almost makes Asuma smile. Almost. They reach the ridgeline in broken formation but intact, and for one suspended moment, it looks like they might actually do it cleanly from there. Then the final opposition appears. Not another instructor from the same pattern, someone higher. Someone who was observing the entire time and has now stepped in because the result has become too interesting to leave unfinished. The figure lands lightly in their path, not threatening in any obvious way, and that in itself is enough to chill the air. A jonin. Not there to hurt them. There to see what they do when they realize ordinary success is no longer available. The signal tag hangs from a post behind him, visible and unreachable. No one moves at first. The jonin's expression is calm. You can still win. That is the cruel genius of the statement. It offers hope while forcing them to decide what winning means. Kusei tightens, ready to charge. Obito looks from the tag to the jonin and back again, pride and doubt colliding visibly. Gekko is already searching for structural alternatives. Kakashi's stance sharpens into something almost frighteningly adult. Asuma sees all of it in an instant. If Kakashi goes alone, he may actually touch the tag. If Kusei supports him, they might break the line for half a second. If Obito tries to prove himself here, the jonin will read him like a book and flatten him. If they act as separate talents, the village gets its answer. He exhales once and makes the only choice that matters. Don't beat him, Asuma says quietly. Move him. The others look at him, even Kakashi. Asuma's eyes never leave the jonin. He's the obstacle, not the goal. It is the simplest thing he has said all day. It is also the thing none of them were about to do on their own. The jonin smiles faintly, as though delighted the children have made the exercise worth remembering. Then they move. Kakashi first, because of course it is Kakashi first. All speed and exact violence, stripped clean of wasted motion. The jonin meets him easily, but that was never the point. Kusei hits the opposite angle half a breath later with enough force to turn reaction into adjustment. Gekko cuts not at the man but at the ground lines he must use to maintain control. Obito, furious, determined, no longer frozen, commits where the opening actually exists instead of where his pride wants it to, and Asuma drives through the space all of them create, not past the Jonin. Around him, one line, one turn, one moment of controlled imbalance. His fingers catch the signal tag. The whistle sounds immediately after. Exercise over. No one speaks at first. They are all breathing too hard, running on too much adrenaline, too aware that something more than a game just happened. Then Kusei barks out a laugh, half disbelieving and half victorious. Obito stares at the tag in Asuma's hand as though he personally dragged it out of fate by refusing to let go. Gecko says, very dryly, that was inefficient. Kakashi looks at Asuma and, after a beat, says, it worked. From him, it might as well be applause. The instructors gather them afterward with professional calm, but the calm is thinner now. They have seen something they were looking for, and perhaps something they were not. Not the strongest child, not the fastest, not the most obedient, a formation, a set of bonds choosing itself under pressure. Asuma feels the significance of that more deeply than the success itself. Because somewhere in the background of all this, men like Danzo and Orochimaru are still watching for talent they can isolate, define, and use. But what happened today made isolation harder. Not impossible. Never that. Just harder. The village can still make plans around them. It will. That is what villages like this do. But from this point on, those plans will have to account for something less convenient than raw potential, loyalty. The aftermath unfolds quietly. No medals, no public declarations. Just private remarks, altered glances. The subtle shift in how instructors and officials look at the five of them after that day. They are no longer being read only as children with promise. Now they are being read as vectors. Possible futures. Asuma hates that word even when no one says it aloud. He feels it most in the days that follow when life returns, outwardly, to normal. Academy lessons, training, meals, household conversations. The ordinary frame reasserting itself over extraordinary pressure. And yet nothing is ordinary now. Kakashi begins speaking to him with slightly less distance, which in Kakashi's case is the equivalent of opening a gate and then standing in the doorway with a weapon to make sure no one comments on it. Kusei grows louder in his loyalty, though he still expresses it mainly through challenge and refusal to let any tension rest for too long. Gecko remains spare with words but now drifts toward the group, not by chance, but by habit. Even Obito, especially Obito, starts looking less like someone trying to force his way into relevance, and more like someone who believes, however cautiously, that he might already have a place. That matters almost more than the exercise. Because it means Asuma's greatest intervention so far has not been a fight, a policy, or some grand correction of history. It has been this. Refusing to let the future's most breakable heart stand alone long enough to become someone else's weapon. That truth steadies him right up until the village reminds him how little any victory stays simple. The reminder comes at dusk, several days later, in the form of a corridor and a conversation he is not meant to hear. Again, perhaps this is how Konoha truly speaks to him now, not face to face, but in fragments caught at thresholds. Two voices. One belongs to an advisor he recognizes by tone, if not always by sight. The other, calm and disturbingly smooth, stops him cold before the words fully register. Orochimaru. He remains perfectly still in the shadow of the hall. They are speaking quietly, but not so quietly that meaning is lost. About accelerated promise. About the usefulness of observing children before they grow into habits harder to reshape. About how early alignment can determine later outcomes more efficiently than correction. Asuma feels something cold and ugly settle beneath his ribs. Early alignment. There it is again. The language of cultivation used so casually it almost sounds benevolent. Then Orochimaru says, with soft interest, the Sarutobi boy is especially curious. Curious, not admirable, not gifted, curious. As though he is a specimen already under glass. The advisor says something about lineage, about the Hokage's caution, about the complication of perception. Orochimaru hums, faintly amused. Complication is often where the most interesting results begin. The conversation moves on after that, but Asuma no longer hears much of it. He does not need to. The warning is complete. The men circling the future are closer than ever. The children are no longer beneath notice. And whatever small ground he has managed to secure through bond and choice, it exists inside a larger game that is still tightening around them. When he finally steps away from the hall, he does so slowly, carefully, forcing each breath to stay quiet. Fear is there. Revulsion too. But beneath both of them, something else has hardened past the point of return. Resolve. Not the frightened determination of a reborn child trying to outrun a dead man's fate. Something steadier. If the village insists on planning around him, then he will plan back. If men like Danzo and Orochimaru see children as resources, then he will become the kind of obstacle that turns acquisition into cost. If the timeline is already changing, then he will change it with intention rather than waiting for tragedy to choose the shape of his life for him. That night, he does not train harder, he trains more clearly. Every motion with the wooden blade becomes a promise. Every foot placement, a statement. Every breath drawn into control, an argument with the future. He is not building toward glory, not even toward victory. He is building toward interference. The others do not yet know how much they will matter. Kakashi does not yet know how much of his soul depends on not being left alone inside brilliance. Obito does not yet know how fragile the path ahead of him really is. Kusei and Gecko do not yet know how valuable their steadiness may become when the world around them begins demanding masks. But Asuma sees enough now. Enough to understand that the war to come will not begin only with armies. It will begin with which children are allowed to remain human long enough to choose their own loyalties. And for the first time since death, that realization does not make him feel smaller. It makes him feel dangerous in the right way. Because now the shape of the story is clear. A dead man was offered a second life and took it thinking survival would be enough. He woke in Konoha as Asuma Sarutobi and discovered that memory alone could not save him. He learned the village was already changing, already watching, already deciding which futures it wanted to claim. So he trained. He adapted. He built bonds where history preferred fractures. And in doing so, he stopped being a child merely trying to avoid one known death. He became a threat to the pattern itself. That is where this part of the story has to end. Not because the danger is over, but because it is finally honest. The board is set. The watchers are watching. The bonds are forming. And the hands reaching for the future have begun to close. But the future they planned on is no longer the only one in motion. Because one change inside a story like this never stays small. One boy seeing too much can alter a village. One friendship formed early enough can derail a tragedy before it learns its own name. One act of choosing each other under pressure can become the first crack in a machine built to turn children into tools. And that is what makes this timeline so dangerous and so fascinating. Because the real story is only beginning. If you've been following this alternate path with me, then you already know we're past the point where anything can return to the version of Naruto history we thought we knew. The choices ahead will decide alliances, betrayals, battles, and the kind of men these children become when the shinobi world finally demands payment from them. So stay with me for the next chapter of the story. This is not an ending, it is the moment before everything truly unfolds. And here, in fanfics in a nutshell, that is exactly where the most interesting timelines begin. To be continued.